Hello and welcome to the Write Hive 2025 panel, Maintaining Suspense in Horror Novels. I am your moderator, TJ McLaughlin, and I'm very interested in this because I've been writing horror and kind of accidentally fell into it, so I have a lot to learn. And I'm looking forward to learning from these ladies. Let's go ahead and start with Ella Marie Wood. Go ahead and each of you introduce yourselves. Let us know your name, what you write, and how long you've been writing horror, please.
Sure. Okay. I'm Elmarie Wood. I am a psychological horror author. I've been writing horror fiction for 46 years, which is not a joke. I started when I was five. No, 47 years. Okay. I started when I was five, and I've been writing ever since, actively writing ever since. So that's kind of, now you've made me say that number, TJ. I don't know. I wasn't thinking about that until I said it.
Fair enough. Marissa, please.
Hi, yes, I am Marisa Noelle. I have been published about 6 years, but I have, much like Elmarie, I've always been writing. I write horror as well as dystopian and fantasy and dark fantasy fairy tale retellings. So all of my books kind of have horror elements in one way or another because that's my happy place. I grew up inhaling Stephen King and Dean Koontz, and that's kind of influenced all my love of horror and tension and suspense. So yeah, all the horror.
Awesome. Rhonda?
Well, so my name is RJ Joseph, aka Rhonda Jackson Garcia. I'm all the women. I have been writing for a super long time. El Marie just made me think about that. I was first published at 17, so that's been a really, really long time.
And finally, Brenda.
Hi, I'm Brenda Radchik. I'm from Mexico City and I write mostly body horror. And I've been writing for many years, I guess 12, but I've started being published 5 years ago.
Awesome. So this is about maintaining suspense, but let's go ahead and first of all define our terms. What do we mean when we talk about suspense, and how is it different from other kind of horror-ish themes like just fear or shock or thriller or things like that?
Suspense is the thing, isn't it? I mean, I think that when you, especially from a psychological horror perspective, it's very much like a thriller novel, if you will. Psychological horror really straddles the line between a lot of different genres. So you can play around with things like suspense and draw it out. I mean, fear is immediate, right? And then the horror would be the aftermath. So something scares you, and then the horror of what you just saw permeates, right? But those are immediate responses. Suspense will draw everything out, it's what keeps you turning the page, and what keeps you, afraid of what might be around the corner. So while I know that certain subgenres make less use of suspense, at least in the horror genre overall, make less use of suspense, it's an element that I think can be used in all of writing, any writing style, because it draws the reader in and, extends the fear, or extends the emotion, whatever emotion you're shooting for.
Yeah, I would agree. I think suspense is actually the backbone of any horror thriller, pasty book that you're going to write, which leads up to your fear, because you're not going to have fear without that suspense, and your fear is a bigger emotion because you've been riding that suspense, and then something happens which creates. I remember when I was reading The Exorcist at 14, and you have that building suspense that she's possessed, and then the head turns and all this horrible stuff, and then the fear is there. And the fear came in because I had a nightmare after I read that. So, and then shock. I think shock really happens more with probably body horror. Correct me if you think I'm wrong, Brenda, but also with plot twists potentially when you've been having suspense and fear, bumble along, and then you get this wow. That's quite scary. I think, Brenda, I'm curious to hear what you say, because with body horror, there's going to be a lot more graphic detail, I would think. And how do you build suspense? Do you use as much suspense, or do you just go in for the off the arms and legs kind of approach? So
Thank you, Marisa. Well, I think um, shock and disgust and all these things that come with body horror don't work as well if you don't have suspense. And like suspense with fear builds dread, and that's like the thread that makes the reader keep going. So you build that, and then like in body horror, the payoff is the shock, but it doesn't work without the suspense. What do you think, RJ?
Yeah, I agree with all of you. I think that suspense is that main thing that has to be there, sort of like the blanket arc. And then fear and shock are points that happen along that arc. But if you don't have the suspense, people are not going to keep reading. You have to make sure that the reader is always thinking, wait, something else is going to happen.
Exactly.
Great.
I'm curious, how do you think it varies in books as opposed to like movies? Because sometimes if you get like a slasher movie, it starts right away with all of that shock, doesn't it? I'm just curious about what you guys think of how that medium is different and applying that, maybe because it's a visual impression. I don't know. This is just I've just suddenly occurred to me. So yeah, sorry.
I think we so often think about film when we talk about horror because it's visual and you can do so many different things with that medium. I think that in the movies, it's music, it's shadows,
Yes.
it's, you know,
Yeah.
quiet
Yes.
or loud. It depends. I think the quiet works better, but that's just, you know, that's the side of the genre I sit on. But, you know, I think that there's all those different elements you can bring in. And in writing, it's difficult when we're trying to write, you know, that or create a scene that has a specific tone if we can't actually show or, you know, audibly provide cues for that tone. But that's the beauty of doing both, of reading both. Like you mentioned, Marissa, that you read The Exorcist when you were 14. I don't think I read it. I saw it when I might have been 9, which is just not. I blame myself. Like it was not like mom was like, "Look, let's watch this." It was me. That was me. But it was early. I will admit that. But I don't think I read it until I was in my 20s. And just the, oh my gosh, the juxtaposition of what you're seeing and what you can read, it's so different. So I think we can get so much from both. And I don't really see that same difference with it both being great quality pieces in the end in other genres. So I think that, you know, any author needs to be embracing film and any filmmaker needs to be embracing the literature side of it because
Absolutely.
they're working in tandem.
I think you're spot on with the audio there, because I remember when I used to try and sneak watching horror movies when I had my eldest was like 1 year old, and I thought, you know, his brain's not developed yet. He doesn't know what I'm watching, you know, but the music would stop and turn him around, and I'd just mute it. And then it had no impact without the sound. So I think that's a really key point. And that's obviously not something we can do in books. So
You can sort of get away with doing that in a short story, like yeah, just starting with a shock, and then like the format is so small, so short that the reader will know right away, or like in the next few pages what's going on. But with a novel, like if you start with a very shocking scene, that it's very difficult to go back from that and then like explain all the things. I mean, you can do it, but I feel like you have to start like slower,
yeah.
as opposed to a movie that like, since it's going like faster, just like with a short story, then they can explain to you what's going on without the reader or the viewer being confused. Like I think it might be too confusing with a book, like a long book.
Although I've noticed a trend in recent years that first sentence, really to hook the reader has become so much more important. And it is a shock statement a lot of the time. And a lot of time, if you're in the horror genre, it's like, you know, you pull the blade out of the body and blah, blah, and then you're like, okay, obviously as a reader, you're immediately there. And I think that is a little bit of a shock factor, because then obviously as you read on, it dials it back and you're like, you're not in the middle of a murder scene, you're actually, but they do that to shock you into reading more, I think. And that's across genres, I've noticed that. So yeah, there's being more immediate and then building it up then, I guess, is my random ramblings. So thank you.
I think a lot of that has to do with trending. I think that back in the 80s, that's what they were doing then. Lawrence Sanders did that all the time. Ira Levin was king for giving us something that we didn't really understand
Yeah.
immediately, and then we figured out later on just by, you know, the prose. But there's a whole idea of starting in the middle of the action, which is something I do a lot, but because I'm not doing a whole lot of extreme, you know, horror or
Yeah.
gore. I said there's some, but it's not a whole lot of it. So I play around with, you know, let me see if I can shock them first. And if I can shock them, but I'll dial it back immediately. You know what I mean? I'm just like, I'm not staying here. I'm coming here.
Yeah.
We're not living right here.
That's exactly
But
it. Yeah.
you know, if you, but that's harkening back to stuff that people were doing in the 80s when it was really the heyday for our genre, which I don't know, this time period is really starting to take off. And I think that we're living in this golden age of horror right now. So I don't know which is the heyday anymore, but having, you know, been a reader in the 80s, my stealing books and just reading these, stealing books from my mother, I should say, let me be clear, and reading these, you know, reading these stories that resonated with me on a different level. That's a practice that they were playing with way back, and so I'm kind of happy to see it come back.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So like Poe was really, really good at that. Let's start out with, is this person crazy? Or are they not? Is this really happening? Is it not? And then kind of maintaining that throughout. So yeah, I'm really excited to see that some of these craft items are coming back. Because there's nothing like reading something that somebody says something totally unhinged. The first thing you see, they're talking like, and you're thinking, should I even listen to you? Well, wait a minute, I guess maybe I should. And then that kind of helps to maintain the suspense, because you're totally torn between, did this happen? Did you imagine this? Really? I don't know. But what if?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Do you know, I think one of my favorite methods is what Dean Koontz used to do in his early years, where he writes obviously mostly in third person. And that first chapter was always a really long chapter, and you would really get into the character, and you'd have these hints of struggling to make ends meet, wanting the wedding for the fiance, and you'd really start to identify with this character. And then at the end of that chapter, that character would be killed. And that's not the main character. And then he moves on. And you're like, so he would put me through the emotional ringer because I'd get attached to this character. And now I'm like, okay, now you have shocked me. Now I want to know what's going on. Now I want to know. Now this has to pay off because I was invested in this character and I need to know why that happened. So I think that's a really clever technique. And it builds good suspense as well. So I'm going to try it.
So one of the things that came up in all that, in defining suspense, was this, it seems to have a lot of connection to tension and dread and stuff like that. And as was mentioned by Brenda about story length, and Marisa mentioned earlier about including horror as an element in a wide array of genres, how do things like genre or length, or, you know, kind of how did the atmosphere you're going for, how do these things shape the way that you use suspense and the way that you introduce it and the way that you sustain it?
Gonna have to think about that one.
That's a good one. That's a good question. So you're thinking, so in essence, how do we utilize the different subgenres that we all are writing within to weave in the suspense? Is that the question? So I'm sure that I'm clear.
Yeah. How does your
this
subgenre and your length shape how you approach this?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think Brenda made a really good comment earlier about how shorter stories can allow for certain things that we can't necessarily do in a novel. A novel gives you so much space that you can play with anything. You know, you can run down the rabbit hole, Marisa, that, you know, I think that some of Dean Koontz's first chapters were, you know, just you, and it's a great technique, right? But you can do that in a novel. In a short story, you really don't have all that room. You have to kind of get to the point, and the point needs to be, you know, it needs to be impactful. So you've got to like hit the point hard. And so therefore, and especially if you're like me, who writes flash fiction as opposed to like short stories that are 7,500 words are not short to me. Like, I just don't understand what we're talking about. So it's not the definition of short, but, you know, give me 800 words, give me 1,200 words. That's where I like to say, but that's not easy when you're talking about character development, when you're talking about trying to, you know, create the suspense and all the tone points we have to hit. So your length is definitely going to impact, you know, how you introduce and maintain suspense. Your subgenre will also do that. I think that, as Brenda and RJ write this extreme horror stuff. That is not, well, Brenda's writing body horror, and I can tell you personally, some of RJ's horror is body horror. A lot of it's extreme outside of just body. I call her my creator. But anyway, they can do that a little bit differently than what someone quiet and psychological like I am has to do. But it might be in some ways easier for me to just run underneath the surface with the suspense, because that's what my genre lends itself to in the first place. So the way that we tell our stories and where we tell those stories is definitely going to be, the defining factor for how we utilize any craft element, including suspense.
I agree. I think you're right. I think with the body horror, that might be the one genre in horror that actually, not that it has different rules, but that you can do more with in terms of shock, dread, disgust. Not that other horror novels don't have those elements, but you can really lean into it with that type of suspense. I mean, for me, mine always has supernatural dark fantasy elements in it. So I have to also build the world building around that and the rules. Now, thankfully, my books are set in this world. So that's one bit that's a little bit easier. But yeah, both have to kind of complement each other, because you have to make it believable. So you have to build in that suspense of, oh, this could actually happen to me, as well as the suspense throughout the novel as well. Yeah, I think my thoughts.
Yeah, I think another thing that helps is like raising the stakes every so often. So you start like with not as like big stakes, and then you start raising them and raising them, and then like when things go sideways is like the the end of the suspense, right? But like you start turning the dial of, oh, and if this happens, then this will happen, then this, and then it starts to become like a bigger and bigger problem.
Yeah.
One,
When you write your body horror, do you have to build up in how gruesome it is? Because forgive me, I don't actually read a lot of body horror, because I can feel my lip curling, and I'm just me going, I don't like slashes and things like that. And I think of it in terms of like, when you have a character that's afraid, you don't want to go straight into dry mouth, heart pounding, because it's too much too soon. You need to build up to those reactions. So is it the same when you write your actual body horror bits, that you start a little bit smaller and kind of go more graphic as it goes on?
Yeah, definitely. Like I'm thinking of my novel right now. It's not out yet. It comes out next year, but in it, this woman has like a supernatural pregnancy. So how I built it is that at the end of each act, so at the end of the first act and at the end of the second act, and so on, like I would have a climax, and the climax would be like a body horror thing. So like in the first act, she does a ritual to get pregnant, and so they have this like sacrifice with an animal and stuff. And so that's like pretty gruesome, but all the first part is just like setting it up and making it like seem that it's impossible, and then it's like very gruesome, and then yeah, she gets pregnant, and so it slows down again. Like you can't just be, otherwise it loses its effect. Yeah.
yeah, well, that's also though when you think about in a lot of my short stories, I'm always playing with so many literary devices, and one of those that helps build suspense is characterization, right? So like you never know everything there is to know about a person in just a moment. I mean, you can get vibes, you can get a pretty good a picture, but there's always stuff that you're not going to know. And so when writing these short stories, you kind of have to give the reader those little things where your character's growing, which they should be. They got to be changing. They cannot be flat, static characters. They have to be dynamic. They got to keep growing, so that there's always this idea of, wait, there's more. Wait, there's something else we can do. And setting works the same way. I do write a lot of kind of gothicy sort of things. And so that's a really good medium that even when stuff is extreme, you still have this whole setting to play with. Like, I mean, like here in the South, like right now we're in hurricane season. Like, so one day it's raining and it's like 75 degrees. Well, then the next day though, the setting is it's 98 degrees and everything is totally sweltering. And then there might be a storm coming, right? So if you use those different devices and different elements, I think that that's a really effective way to build a suspense because you don't know what's going to happen next. So you have to always leave room for, oh, wait, but there's more.
Mhm.
I like that you
Absolutely.
talked about setting as a device because it is. I mean, we so
Yeah.
often don't think about that, but setting is a character, guys. I mean, it's just you know, and if you ignore that, you're missing an element that you can use to create the suspense. All of these elements need to create the suspense. We talked about movies and how they do so well with sound, but that's almost hitting the nail on the head. You know what I mean? We've got to, as authors, we have to weave, you know, different dynamics together to create that tone. So yeah, setting is absolutely part of that. I just like that you said that, RJ.
And I think, I mean, I was going to talk about that later on, and I absolutely agree. And I always use the weather as its own character as well. And I have a book coming out, well, not till 2027, which I can't talk about yet, but it's about 16s who get stuck in a time loop with a serial killer. But rather than make it rainy and all that kind of stuff, I put them in a heat wave because I kind of wanted to play with doing something unexpected. But it's that oppressive heat and lack of water and dehydration and hallucinations that kind of fed into the horror that I wanted to do. So I think that setting can add so much to your suspense. Totally down for that. Yeah, completely agree with you.
Yeah. Let's talk about characters and setting and stakes and everything like that. If we could, I'd like to dig deeper into that, like tricks or ideas or ways to kind of use the elements of the story or even reader expectations to build and maintain suspense.
Yeah, like as RJ mentioned earlier, um, the dread can come from anywhere, and I think that you can play with the psychological, as she said, like is this real? Is this supernatural? Is this real? And for example, like houses, if you don't maintain them, they start rotting. Like even if it's not like even if there's not a supernatural presence, like humidity will start seeping in, and animals will start reclaiming, and the plants will start climbing inside. So I think you can play a lot with that too. Like, is this like a ghost, or is this just like a house that's been abandoned?
Yeah, foreshadowing works really well too.
Yes.
Like for any length of story, because you can always just say the thing. That's a thing that I realized was a part of my writing voice a long time ago. I just say the thing up front, and then readers are always still saying, "But I didn't know you really meant the thing," you know. So foreshadowing, sprinkling this throughout, like say, giving these little tips about, hey, there's something else you might want to be paying attention to. Hey, there's something else going on here. So I think that just going back to just those basic literary devices really helps a lot.
There was a point when I was in school, I learned about, and I hadn't thought about this. I guess I had done it before, but I don't know, you just don't know the names of things or that things are real and you're not making it up. So I I learned about using like weather to show the passage of time. I did that, but I wasn't thinking about that. So if I'm wanting to talk, move the story along and get to the winter, but I'm standing in the middle of the summer right now, I would just change the weather, change the way that people are dressed, change, whatever's going on outside. And suddenly everyone understands that it's cold. I don't know. It sounds simplistic. However, it's not when you weave it into the rest of what you're doing. And it's showing versus telling. You're not just blatantly saying, and now it is winter, and cold, the leaves are gone. You can do that, right? But we know we shouldn't do that. We know we shouldn't just some stuff you don't just say, right? And that was something that I was doing But you can imagine how gratified I felt when I realized, oh, I was actually doing something I was supposed to be doing.
It's a real thing.
Oh, this is real. But it as a reader, I remember seeing, just because it hits you and you don't realize it. It's like real, and you don't realize that suddenly you are feeling differently. Suddenly because the key is you want to make your readers feel, right? So if I'm sitting in the middle of the summer, but I want some hot chocolate, that's not normal for me. I don't like hot things like that in the summer. But if I'm thinking I wouldn't mind some hot chocolate later tonight, then the story's done the right thing, because now I'm in the mood for something else. And now I'm feeling a specific way as I engage with this story. So I don't know. I just think writers should never take anything for granted in terms of how we craft our stories, because just one or two words will make a difference for any reader.
And I think that's a prime example of showing versus telling. You're showing your reader all of those things rather than saying it is now winter. So but I think settings work well for foreshadowing as well. I mean, for instance, in the Shadow Keepers, it follows a 16-year-old girl who has apparently a mental health condition and gets committed to a psychiatric hospital. Now, we all know what happens in asylums, and it's never good. So already that kind of sets up the reader to know something's going to go down here, but is it real or is it in her head? So I like to play with that kind of supernatural suspense. I mean, I have another book where they're all lost in the forest and they can't find their way. So you set up these scenarios. Isolation, I think, works really well for suspense. Get rid of the phones, break them, put them somewhere else, depending on what era you're writing in. But if you can isolate your characters, then that is a really good way to build that suspense and that dread of, right, they're stuck. Now what's going to happen to them? I keep making it worse. I have a little post-it by my computer that just says, what can I do to make it worse? Because I used to be too nice on my characters and I used to care too much about them. Now I'm like, bring them the trauma, bring it. So.
Well, how lovely. I've never been nice to my characters. You're probably thinking I should slow down and give them a break. No, I mean, isn't it interesting? You said something, Marisa, that makes me want to jump in. I hate these cell phones and modern technology for what it does to stories. I'm always like snatching them out of people's hands, and now we're just going to go back. We're going way back to the 90s. That's where we're going to be. Keep it up. We'll go to the 70s if we keep playing around. I'm just not fooling around with this technology because they can look things up too much. They can figure out, oh no, there's like an app where you can just put this, I don't know what, it's just an app on your phone and you can hold it up to the sky and it'll tell you what the constellations are.
Yeah. Oh yeah, no, I have that. Yeah.
You have that? Mind you, I've used it. I shouldn't know this. I shouldn't complain, right? But still at all, I'm not going to write about it because if I want you to be lost, I don't want you to be looking at this app. So I just think that some of the technology stuff is great, but it for storytelling, it changes.
Well, then I do. Dynamic. I mean, I do have a book. It's not published, but it was one that I'm working on that is about an AI being who starts to wreak havoc on the world. So I need the technology for that one.
Sure, it just depends. I think here's the thing. It changes. Okay, I'll say it. I'm just going to say it. So when we add all of this technology, right, it changes the kind of story that we're writing because we have to be able to have the characters engage with the technology properly. But when we do that, especially if we dive into what the technology can do, we are changing, I think we are changing subgenres and infusing more sci-fi. That's not a negative. Yeah. It's just different. It's not what I am setting out to write usually. Sometimes if I have an intention to do so, fine. But if that's not my intention, then some of what is happening in the world it changes and colors the perception of what I'm trying to write. Now,
I agree. Yeah, I agree.
In life,
and I write YA, so I need to have, or I need to start with an element of that because my characters are teens and they are Instagramming and Snapchatting and do all those other things.
Right.
And I think of YA not necessarily as an age gap, but as a genre because there are certain themes that go within with YA. And but yeah, I get rid of the phones. I don't think there's a single one I've written where the phones don't like an exit at some point. So, or they're used for a reason that is detrimental. So, but I think, I agree with everything you said. I think it's tricky.
I mean, I recognize how old I sound saying this. It's whatever. I'm leaning into it. I want to be clear. I heard myself. I heard it. I know. But it's just, I don't know. I think as a creator, it's been difficult because now the phones can do everything. There are really many computers in your hand, and hardly anybody's even making phone calls on them anymore. I mean,
No.
when I make a call on it, people look at me like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "It's a phone." I don't understand. It's a phone. But GPS, you don't have to. None of it. I don't know. So it's when you want people to be confused and lost, especially if I want you to not know if something is real, like from a psychological horror perspective. I need that phone to go away because you could look it up and see if it's real or not in a second. and the story's like 2 paragraphs long. Now I don't know if that's the same with extreme horror and with body horror. I'm not sure. Do you find the same problems? Is it problematic for you?
Well, I try to get rid of the technology too. Like I use that as a point of dread, like, oh, there's no signal, there's no internet. And sometimes I just don't mention it. Like in some stories I just write them like more fairy tale like. And since the whole story is built that way, the suspension of disbelief like helps you and no one is asking you, where's the phone? Because the story is like you establish that there are no no phones too.
Yeah, well, there's also though the fact that regardless that these things exist, there are people who are very tech challenged, and I am that person. El Marie knows I'm so tech challenged. If there's a way to mess up something with a certain Maps app, I'm gonna do it. I've literally been driving before, listening to the map, and then it just like stops, right? But also, I live in Texas. There are lots of like dead zones, in all of this space. And so, I mean, it's easy enough for me to write about, let's say, a truck driver who, of course, would have GPS, who, of course, would have a CB, but like you're on this back 2-lane highway in Texas where these things sometimes blink in and out. So I think that being able to use the user error part kind of helps me a lot in the short story realm.
Yeah.
But I think that something that Marisa and El Marie were talking about, though, made me think about how important world building is to maintaining suspense. Like if you build this world, and I am a huge fan of El Marie's work. Like we're not just friends. Like I'm a huge fan, and I always go back to her Realm series. I absolutely love the world that she built partially because you never know what's going to happen. There's always this suspense. And then she kind of mentions one thing in an earlier chapter and then never talks about it again for the next few chapters. And the whole time you're reading, you're going, okay, wait. I know I read about this thing. I know that it was there. What happened? So as a reader, I'm constantly waiting for that other shoe to drop. And then when the other shoe drops, I'm still going back to these other things that exist in this world. And so I think that it's really important that to build worlds like what El Marie and Marisa are talking about, like if you build a world where there's anything that could happen, well, then you're always going to have your reader in suspense about, well, okay, which of these things are they going to decide does happen?
Yeah, spot on.
Can I just say really quickly, oh my God, thank you so much. I want to say that.
No, you are a master world builder, and it sounds like Marisa is also. I mean, like these are the kinds of stories we need to read. And of course, I'm gonna big up, our body horror discussing extreme stuff, Brenda. Like our worlds, they are very compact, but it really depends on what you do with those details. And so it's so important for us as writers to always improve on our craft. Right, to just always improve on how we tell the stories, what we learn to use, what we learn works best for us and the kind of writing that we do. And I'm really excited for all of us that are here because like we have so much to play with to like keep readers in suspense and then shock them, at different points.
Absolutely.
So all this discussion about technology, it makes me wonder if we're going to see kind of a split happening in horror where we get more rural, where there's less signal, versus people who are using the technology and kind of leaning into the sci-fi that El Marie talked about. And so kind of want to move into how do you balance out keeping that suspense and keeping the characters feeling realistic and having reactions and having kind of things in their life that readers are going to associate with.
I think that, you know, as I mentioned on before a little bit, it comes down to what age group you're writing for. And so as I write a lot of YA, that's really important, because if a teen picks up my book and there's not representation of that, that's not realistic, unless it's a completely different fantasy world, obviously. But I think, you know, technology, I think it's going to present new sci-fi horrors, as I can't remember who was talking about that, about the sci-fi. I think it's going to create new things. I don't know if any of you watched Black Mirror, but there was one episode, season 3, where it was all based on social media, and the more likes and stars you got, the higher up, the better hotels you could go to, the better parties you could go to, and all this kind of stuff. So you can play. I think it presents a lot of opportunities to play with in a horror / dystopian environment. But I think it's still going to be easy to get rid of them if that works better for your story. And it depends on the story, what you need to make your story work at the end of the day, which will be different for everybody and the story that we're telling.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And just because these things are present doesn't mean that they have to take front and center. Right. So I have a short story that I wrote called Girl Mom that was about a social media influencer trad wife, right, who wanted to be a trad mom. Right. And so the fact that she was thinking about increasing her followers by getting some kids, like that was a horrific thing, but it really didn't have anything to do with the technology. I mean, okay, yeah, she's making them all pretty. She's showing content to her users of their room. None of that helped. Like none of that helped, you know, her husband when he fell dead and she fed him to the kids, right? Like none of that helped. So it kind of doesn't matter sometimes if these things are present. They don't have to take front and center, because the story was tangentially about social media. Right. But what it was really about was this woman who kind of had this whole other thing going on, and these babies she went and got, and who had something totally else going on. So I mean, because we have to make nods to the things that are happening, even when we're not trying to date our writing. So it's not even about always. Sometimes when I don't want to deal with it, I go write something historical, and I'm talking very historical, as in no, none of this stuff was there. But I don't think that it necessarily has to take front and center. Like just because it exists does not mean that's what the story's about. It can be just props that are also there.
Well, it's a good word, RJ, props. By the way, she talks like that all the time, just randomly showing up, like babies to kids, or kids to babies, or whatever, people to babies. Yeah, she just says things like that randomly. So just there you are. But you know, the prop of the technology, it becomes a literary device. I mean, that's the fact of it. It's another tool that we can use to tell our story. I've been recently leaning into the idea of the obsession that you can nurture if you indulge in all this online behavior, you know. It'll be private, and people are doing it in their privacy of their own houses, and no one knows that they're doing whatever it is. And I think that, and again, I'm approaching it from a psychological horror standpoint. So from my perspective, that's wonderful meat, because if you're sitting there obsessing over someone or something or some, you know, aesthetic or whatever it is, and it is taking over your psyche to the point of, you know, now you don't function the way that you used to function in society. How do I make that scary? Well, the first thing that's scary is the loss of self, and that's a very real, you know, emotion. And the initial question you asked, TJ, was about how do we make, you know, how do we get the characters to actually engage with these emotions and keep the story going? And for me, it's having real reactions to the suspense, like legitimate reactions to the suspense, not something that I've crafted, which took a while. I didn't realize I was actually like making up a reaction as opposed to giving my reaction in different forms. In all writing, there's a piece of your author in the work. You know, likewise, in all writing, there should be space for the reader to engage as well and to add their own responses. Finding that medium is really difficult, but I mean, writing is not easy, right? So you can't expect for it to be simple all the way through. So when I'm looking at something, I envision often, like I'll open up my window and it's just a street, you know, street with houses on the street. What if the ground opens up? Now I'm going to react differently to that than what my neighbor next door, would have a direct shot looking at it, where I'm looking at an angle that neighbor would see directly into the hole. Or my reaction might be, oh, what's going on? And their reaction might be, oh my God, we're dying, because they can see what's in the hole. And what happens, or what are our reactions? And then I write from that space.
Yeah.
My reaction was this. That house is going to say this. This other house is going to do this. Some of the people in the other house are just going to run. What do I do then? Am I going to run? So it's just an exercise that we can all do, in our respective genres,
Yeah.
to try and train our hand to understand how a character would react. Because if it's not a real reaction, if you stub your toe and you just say, oh my, and grasp your pearls, that's not what I would say. I would curse like a sailor if I stubbed my toe, and I would be loud, and I would say I would apologize, but it would be loud, right? And if it's not authentic, readers pick up on that right away. And if you keep being inauthentic, they won't finish the book or the story. So you've just got to, for me, regardless of what we're talking about, what literary element we're talking about, what device, if you are not authentic, it's not going to matter what kind of responses you have, or what technology, or what pretty words you've put in the rest of the story. No one's going to read them.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think the character has to act like the character, and not because you need them to do A, B, or C. But one of the moments I really loved was in the movie Scream. And I love the tongue-in-cheek of that, because I don't know who's seen it, who's not seen it. I know it's not a current film anymore, but Sydney in the character is belittling the killer, saying, everybody always runs up the stairs and they should be running out the front door. But cue that for her, the only place she has to run is up the stairs and lock herself in a room. And I loved that moment, because it's such a cliche, but the way that they delivered that worked, because they'd foreshadowed that moment with that comment. So things like that you can kind of, play around with, are really fun as well.
You've got a keen eye, Marisa. I don't think a lot of people caught that. I really,
yeah,
I
I just loved it, because she's such a strong woman. She's like, I'm not going to run up the stairs. I'm going to run out the front door and get the police. What is she doing? She's running up the stairs, but it worked. She had to do that because that was her only way to survive. So, and she was a strong survivor. So it was completely right for her character to have to be in that situation and do that. So I love that moment. Yeah, I may have watched it a few times.
Brenda, you haven't really said anything about this topic. Did you have anything to add?
No, I agree with everything that all of you have said, and yeah, like again, I agree with RJ about technology being sorry, a prop. I was thinking about, like, as I said earlier, like, I'm not a big fan of using technology in my work, but I was thinking about Christopher Triana, who writes extreme horror too. And he uses a lot of technology, but it's not like in the upfront of the stories. And I just read his most recent book that's called I Don't Recognize This World Anymore. And it's a book about a prison, and this guy is like a new guard in the prison, and he wants to smuggle in drugs. And so he Googles how to do that. And then like that makes things worse. Like he's stuffing birds. And it's like,
Oh, I love it.
yeah. And yeah, he also plays with the lack of resources in some jails. So it's like the metal detector is like flaky, so sometimes it will go off, and then the person that's like in charge of that is like, oh, it's okay, it's always acting up and stuff like that. So like he also plays like with, oh, they're like the technology is not working, so who cares? Like it's not always, and it's true, like I've seen it like we often think like, oh, it's like our life is resolved with that, but not really, and it fails, and you can really play with that. Like in another book, there's a there's a woman who Googles where a serial killer lives. Like he's recently let out of Yale, and she's like a fan of him, and she's like, I'm gonna find him. And things go wrong, very wrong.
Right.
Oh my gosh. See, that's terrifying. That stuff is terrifying, and it's current. It's real. It's now.
Yeah.
as opposed to writing gothic horror where we're just dealing with ghosts and castles or whatever, make it modern, but still the same idea. This is real stuff. And Brenda, the two things you just mentioned are terrifying. And
Right.
right? I mean, but that's how you can use technology to keep the horror alive and keep it modern.
Yeah.
I will give you a little bit of good news. I went to the serial killer convention when it was here in London, and serial killings are definitely on the decrease. And it's because
Okay.
technology, because people get caught quicker these days. So the 80s and 90s was kind of the real 70s, 80s, 90s was kind of the real heyday. But now, not so much. And it's a lot to do with the fact of all the technology that the crime labs have, etc., and DNA and all that kind of stuff. So yay.
Yeah,
Yay. That's great
that's good
news.
to hear.
Oh.
It
So
was a great convention. Yeah.
in terms of building and maintaining suspense, how do you balance the amount of suspense? How do you avoid, like, is there such a thing as too much? If there is, how do you avoid that? How do you avoid too little while you're trying to do that? How do you maintain that balance through the story?
Romance. I put romance as a subplot in mine often.
I love it.
And I never like the romance to take away, but I think, and it's not about the romance, it's about having those quieter moments, because I think if your suspense is just carrying on, and it's having mini victories throughout the book. So they may not have killed the big bad until the end, but actually they've got these small wins that you can go, oh, wow, that's brilliant. You can have a little quiet moment before you start ratcheting things up again. So I think sometimes having a romance subplot does that, and having those small wins so that you're not constantly on a wire, just waiting, because you need, human emotions vary, and you don't want to feel one thing all the time. And that emotional gratification of a character experiencing different emotions will come out to your reader, is what I think.
It's funny. I think I use action, but I also have to be forced to do it because I want the tension. I want the suspense. I literally do not want to let up. I love once I've got my foot on the character's throat and I just leave it there. That's horrible. I know. I hurt myself. I really do feel that way. I mean, I do. But at the same time, you, like Marisa said, and I'm frowning about it. We have to give them a minute, right? But I think that I often give them a quest. So in that minute, there's still some angst, there's still some heightened emotions, but it's not the fear of the fear that of whatever was happening, coming to fruition still lingers, but there's something else to do in the middle. I don't know that I shouldn't say ever, but I don't know that I often have them complete the quest, because that's really not the point. That was just to distract them. But sometimes they do, and sometimes they're happy about it, and I strip that away pretty quickly. I don't know, it's terrible, but I think that that's my voice. That's the way I write. It's horror. This is the horror genre I've always leaned into. We are talking about horror, right? I mean, this is not. There's no requirement for happily ever after here, correct? So I lean into that. And so I think, but yeah, romance, I like the idea of romance, breaking it up. I think I lean towards horror. I was going to say work, because I often recently have been adding some like work elements to distract people from whatever's going on. But even then, that's still sort of an action quest, because they're still trying to solve or find something. So yeah, I think I'm infusing action in mine.
It's really interesting what you said about Quest, because I was just thinking, did anyone else watch Supernatural, like all 15 seasons of it? Love that.
Some.
When you look at a show like that, or any kind of show like that, you have your episode plot and your series plot.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it kind of goes back to a bit like having your mini wins and then your main win. It's the same thing, and you may have clues towards your main plot, throughout each episode, but each episode has its own mini win, and it's the same in books, I think.
Yep.
Yeah.
I usually do this like in the editing stage, but I try to think like, do readers know what the story is about? Like, that's when I think suspense can be too much. Like if you withhold too much information and then they are lost. Like that's what you have to balance, I think. Giving them just enough so they know where this is going and so they feel the tension and the building up, but also you don't want to have them guessing like what's happening. Like they
I
have.
find that comedy works. Oh, yeah, I'm so sorry, Brenda.
No, that's fine. Please go ahead.
Yeah, comedy works well too,
Mhm.
as a sort of a distraction or sort of to kind of break up the monotony of the suspense. Because yeah, it's just not good storytelling to just like string folks along the whole time. As a reader, I would stop reading it. Like I don't want to play no more. Like you're doing too much. I don't want to play anymore. Let's just be done. So yeah, I
Don't
think
kill
that
the
they're
dog.
talking about, yeah, I mean, talking about romance or even comedy, or making sure that we do know that the reader can tell what the story's about. I mean, I think that those are really just important basic craft storytelling elements that you have to kind of think about. Like, there's nothing that should be sustained without any breaks in storytelling. It just shouldn't be.
So I kind of
And
want
breaking
to
rules, I
spend
think.
this
Yeah.
last little bit of our call talking about the payoff, right? You're building the suspense through this whole story. Eventually, there needs to be that ultimate release or that ultimate shock or whatever it's going to be. How do you craft that well? And are you building with that in mind when you're building the suspense the rest of the story?
Mhm.
So I've written my ending before I wrote anything else.
Hmm.
So it's written at the very beginning. Now, how I get to that point is however, I'm a pantser, so I don't really want to plan that, but the ending comes to me first. So I'm just like, oh, that's neat. And I'll write it down. And I mean, I always get to the point, right? But I don't know how I'm going to get there. And I'm just reading the story as we go. So the answer to that is yes and no, because I know where I want to end up, but I don't know how I'm getting there at all. The payoff, you can't, it's, and this is the hard part about writing. You don't want someone to feel like it's all, oh, that's it. Is that all there is? It's anticlimactic. I mean, that's it. How many times have we read a book and wondered, why the author can't seem to close any book? I mean, like, why are we not able to close satisfactorily? The rest of the story is great, but we cannot end the story well. And after a while, I don't think any of us ended well in the beginning, right? We have to learn how to end it properly. So for me, you've got to make sure that I always, psychological horror, I try to always leave something up for discussion later. I'm not going to tell you everything at all. I'm really not. Some things that you're going to wish you knew that I want you, because like I mentioned earlier, there's a relationship between the author and the reader and a responsibility to each other. Where if I write this story, I craft this tale for you, you're not supposed to just be spoon-fed. You need to be engaging and think about it as well. So if you can come away with some thoughts towards the matter, that's the story's better for it. So you've got to figure out how to do that. Sometimes people have to go back and put some Easter eggs into the text later on when they've gotten to their real ending, because they didn't foreshadow anything to that looks like whatever's going to be. And if you do that, you have to be open to the fact that you may have to go back and revisit as an author. That's fine. No one sees your work until you put it out there, right? So you can go back and make the change, and no one ever knew that you didn't know this masterful thing from day one and write all of it, in one sitting. No one knows that. And then I think it's important to just make sure that you are satisfied with the ending, because if you're not satisfied with the ending, no one else is going to be.
Absolutely. I think horror is one of those genres that there are things you can leave dangling. And it's almost expected, I think, in horror to think that,
Yes.
yes, this is all concluded, but this could happen.
Right.
And I love that. That's one of the things I love about the genre. Having said that, there does need to be a satisfying conclusion. And I think both in terms of plot and character. And I think for me, when I'm plotting, and I'm the opposite to you, Anne-Marie, I'm a real plotter with a spreadsheet and everything, I have to tie up my plot and my character arc are working in sync, and I want to have a conclusion for both of them. Now you might have a downward arc for a character, and that's fine, but there needs to be a reason that they went from here to here, and there needs to be a satisfying plot for that reader. Otherwise, I think people will be like, I saw this debate on social media a couple of days ago about people discussing a very popular book that had a major plot twist 3/4 of the way through that was so unexpected and not foreshadowed that it's really disappointed readers. So that's just something you don't want to do. So as Elmarie says, go back, plant your Easter eggs, foreshadow what you need to do in however many drafts it takes you, because you need to give that expectation and that satisfying conclusion to your reader with a little question mark of actually things could get a lot worse, book 2 comes along or not.
Can I jump in real quick and say, I just want to, okay, remember okay, you may not remember this, but think about the 70s movie Flash Gordon. Okay, just look it up. You can find it. You can find it on YouTube. You find everything. But you don't even have to watch the movie. Just fast forward to the very end. At the end of this thing, my dad and I waited forever. Like, we might still be waiting. I don't know, maybe somewhere deep inside us, we're still waiting. But at the end, you see this ring. Ming's ring is on the ground. And it said something about this is the end. And then the ring is the end. It says, or is it? And we were just like, oh.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we had waited.
My favorite movie for that is The Descent, about the girls that go caving and have all them. And you see the one survivor gets out, gets in the car, drives away, and then you flash back to she's still in the cave struggling up this mountain of skulls, and you don't actually know what is the real ending. And I love that ambiguity, because you can choose, depending on your soul and the color of your heart,
right,
whether she got out or she didn't, so love that.
Yep. The color of your heart. Marisa, that was the quote of the day.
Really, right.
I love it.
And I agree with the both of you that horror allows us to do that, right? So like at the end of the day, the serial killer who was causing all the suspense may end up dead. However, we don't know that one of their, could have been victims takes on. We don't know that they don't come back from the dead. We just don't know. But there's no more suspense because there has been some type of a conclusion. So we can get away with that in horror. Yeah, I mean, as a sometimes romance writer, you can't do that. Like, you can't do that part. Everything's got to be wrapped up really nicely, which is great. I mean, that's what makes that genre wonderful for, us readers that read it. But I think horror is really good for ending that line of suspense, but also branching off into other possibilities depending on what your readers are thinking. What are they wanting to do,
Yeah, and I think also the most satisfying payoffs are when they are brought on by the protagonist. Like they don't have to defeat evil, but like if they are like if they die or whatever ending you decide, like to make it seem like they brought it in on themselves. It's more powerful than just like some random cause.
Oh my gosh, that is a great point, Brenda. That's a great point. I read a novella recently by Dan Franklin, and I'm gonna totally forget the title of it because I do forget titles. But it was a young adult coming of age story that involved a mermaid. And like I know that there are some people who probably would read that and go, no, I can't believe this is what happened at the end. But because Franklin writes so beautifully, and because the story he was telling was of a troubled character, to me, the ending was very satisfying. That part of the suspense was down into the sea. Yes, thank you, TJ. That is it. Brilliant, beautiful writing. But I remember thinking, okay, once part of the suspense is over, this one teen is no longer living in angst, right? Just to me, that's a solution. It might not be the happy one, but I feel like it was the right one. But at the same time, we now have this mermaid on the loose, right? So, I mean, I think about something like that. That makes me think about what you're saying is that, yeah, for the protagonist, the suspense is over. This thing ended, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's all wrapped up pretty. So, yeah, that made me think about that. It's a wonderful novella. If you all haven't read it, you really should pick it up.
Well, as a mermaid writer, I am intrigued, and I just looked it up, and I took one look at that cover, and I thought, yeah, that's not got a happy ending.
Exactly. Well, and it depends on the color of our hearts, because yeah,
Yes,
that's going to
indeed.
be the saying of that's going to be my
Indeed.
saying for the next couple of months.
Seriously, that's my go-to now.
Oh, fabulous.
There was a happy ending, but I know a lot of people, they don't think like that about happy like I do. So yeah, it's a really good book though. Really,
It does look quite
beautifully
scary,
written.
actually. Yeah.
Yeah, beautifully written story. Oh my gosh, just the writing is so beautiful.
Add to basket.
Yes.
So, last question: what are some things to avoid when you're trying to build and maintain suspense?
Telling, don't tell. Like we talked about that earlier. I think
Hmm.
that's like the big, don't just tell me he's frightened. Okay, I mean, what happens when he's frightened, or do his palms sweat? Does he forget how to speak, or like what's going on? Like, don't just tell me. I think that that's a big issue because a lot of us started just telling, right? I mean, when we were in school, I mean, I'm talking elementary, you're just telling the story. You never, I went to the store and then they picked this up and this happened. I saw a beast outside and I ran in back in the store and I picked up an umbrella to fight the beast. Yes, you can have that, anyone who wants that. But, I'm just saying, you just tell the story and it's direct. Then as we decide to be writers, right, we decide to listen to the calling that we probably all felt. We realize that that's not the way that we do it. It's at least not the way it should be done all the time. There's a space for that, but not the whole piece, especially if we're talking about a novel. So you've got to figure out your way and find your actual voice and what elements you use, what devices you use to show as opposed to tell. Because then there's people who say there's too much showing. I mean, I've read something once where, and I don't know the name, but I read it and it was like really the description about the color of the wall went on and on and on, might have been 3 pages. And I get why it was important. I really do, but not as important as I mean, gray is gray. I don't know. Gray is gray. So I just don't know why we have to keep going. But it was important. It was too much, but it was an important element. So you have to figure out how do we make it work? And that's not something anyone can tell you outright. You have to, that's a feel. You have to practice and figure out what the spot is for you. It's not going to be the same spot for me.
Yeah, to piggyback off of that, I'm going to say my always go-to for all of these questions about what not to do, read widely. Read very widely. I'm very suspect of a writer who says to me that they don't read. That means to me that I'm not going to read your work. I already know it's going to be whack. I don't want to read it. But in order to avoid doing this the wrong way, read widely so that you can tell. You will start to be able to tell writers and stories that have done have maintained suspense very well, and then those that have not. And I guarantee you that in that reading, you're going to absorb some of that you can, as El Marie said, that you can then point towards your own writing and use your own voice to kind of develop. But if you're not reading, then you kind of don't always know what it looks like when it's bad. So you have to read to kind of see, well, who's doing it well. Read more of their work, not to emulate it, but to learn from it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree with both of those things. And I think a little bit about the telling versus showing is overwriting is trying to give too much description of fear, whether that be what you're feeling internally or what you're seeing, because readers are smart and really you only need to dangle a few things. And I think the best suspenseful writers are the ones that give you a canvas with a few smudges but don't actually give you much more than that, so that your imagination can build the real fear. So I think that's probably one of the most important rules for horror as opposed to other genres. Yeah, I think we've talked about so many other things, so like foreshadowing and ambiguity, and don't scale up too quickly with the fear. I think, nobody wants your character on their day one to see a black cat and then suddenly have a panic attack, because it's not, you want to save the panic attack for when the killer's got the knife and, they're running down the street. So, build up your fear reaction so that your character's not over the top and not too many tears, because if they cry too much, you kind of lose patience with them. So
Mhm.
yeah, random, but yeah.
No, it's a good point though.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, this has been a great chat. I've learned a lot. I hope all you viewers have learned a lot as well. So let's go ahead and one more time, just go ahead and have each of you tell us who you are, what you write, and where we can find you online. Let's go ahead and start with Brenda, please.
Yeah, I'm Brenda Radchik. I write body horror and with supernatural elements. And you can find me at brendaradchik.com.
RJ?
I'm RJ Joseph. I write all things creepy and horrible, creative and academic. And I can be found on most social media platforms behind at R Jackson Joseph.
Marisa?
Hi, I am Marisa Noelle. I write anything in the speculative field, but I do have a love of horror, dark fantasy, fantasy romance, dystopian. I mean, any of those. My main social media is TikTok, which is on the screen. That's from my happy place. I do have a website. Do subscribe. You get loads of free books if you do, which is just marisanoelle.com. And I'm pretty much on all social media platforms, but easy to find as well. So.
And Elmarie.
Before I give my contact information, I want to say I am so excited to be on this panel with all of you. This would not have been the makeup of a panel about anything horror just 10 years ago. So we've come a long way. And I really just want to say these are powerhouse women, and I'm really excited. Talking about body and extreme horror in the same vein as dark fantasy and psychological horror, that would not be the expectation. And I'm just, thank you, TJ, for putting together such a wonderful group of people. Wonderful. So I'm Elmarie Wood. I write psychological horror, and you can find me at elmariewood.com. That'll send you to all of my different social media locations as well.
Awesome. And as I said at the beginning, my name is TJ McLaughlin. I've enjoyed being the moderator here. Please continue chatting in the Discord channel and stick around for the rest of Write Hive 2025. And if you're on Blue Sky, check out the Write Hive account. They have a starter pack with all of the moderators and panelists and things like that. You can follow everyone with one click. So check that out as well, and enjoy the rest of Write Hive 2025. Thank you.
Bye.
You.
Okay.